Alright, today we're here to talk about the bandsaw and bandsaw safety. One of the most versatile and common machines that woodworkers will use. This is often also used in meat cutting as well. There are metal cutting bandsaws, so really good, useful skills to learn. Alright, so to start with, why is it called a bandsaw? Well, if we look at open up this top wheel guard, there is an upper wheel and a lower wheel, and the blade stretches. It's one continuous blade or band that stretches around those wheels. Now you'll notice that the teeth on the blade are pointing in a downwards fashion, so that as the machine is turning, it's going to push that piece of wood down onto this table surface. Okay. So safety wise, we have a few things to protect us. We have a safety guard here. It's a blade guard. We also have another blade guard that I've added onto this machine to help keep our fingers out of that area. As well, we have our wheel guards, our upper wheel guard and our lower wheel guard, and those will also protect us. When we're talking about blades, there are different types of blades. This blade is quite narrow and it has quite a few teeth. So the bigger the teeth, the easier it will cut through thicker material, but it will also splinter less. As well, the narrower the blade, the sharper the curves you'll be able to cut, but you might have more trouble cutting through thicker pieces, or at least you'll have to go a lot slower with your feed. A wider blade is going to have a harder time making those corners, so you have to do some other techniques, to make those sharp curves. Okay, on this machine, this is an older general machine. In our shop here, we also have a Jet, which is a fairly common machine, and it's a really standard size machine that is very common in different brands, but it's a similar style. Alright, so I really like this General, even though it's older. It's really well made. So first thing that you'll notice is that this blade is not held on at all by anything other than just tension and alignment. So when using this machine, for my students, I'm asking you that you don't adjust this knob right up top. This is our tensioner, and that's going to raise and lower that blade depending on how much tension we need on it. So please don't mess around with that. If you think something's not quite right, you hear a ticking noise, it's usually a sign that the blade is cracked, or if something just seems out of the ordinary, stop the machine, let it come to a stop, unplug it, and then come and get me. Alright, and likewise, if you go up to use the machine and it's unplugged, come and check with the teacher first. Alright. One other adjustment here that I would prefer you guys not to do is this right here. And this is our blade alignment, this knob on the back, and the blade alignment will tilt the upper and lower wheel to make sure that that blade is riding in the center of the upper wheel. If you tilt that forward, that blade will come off of the wheel and get all tangled up inside. So that's what that top wheel does. The bottom wheel really is just simply makes the blade spin. So it's connected to some pulleys in the back here, which down below is where our electric motor would be, and that's what makes that spin. These two machines have what's called a magnetic safety switch. So in order for this machine to start, you have to turn that red button to the right and it pops out, and then you press the green button to turn it on. Okay. Now, why would it have that? If the power goes out while using this machine, when its power comes back on, it's not going to automatically start up. It'll stay off. So that's a nice added feature. Alright, so with that, make sure, of course, that no loose clothing, long hair, bracelets, chains, all that kind of stuff needs to be tied up or put away, and we'll go from there. Okay, so we're going to close our guard, close our other wheel guard. You'll notice too that this These tables will tilt most commonly from 0 to 45 degrees. So we would loosen this knob right here as well as the other one at the back, tilt it, and then tighten it up at the angle that we want. When you're done with it, make sure it goes back to 0 degrees. You'll also notice that we have our dust collector hooked up to this machine. So whenever you're using these machines, the dust collector needs to be turned on. For training purposes, we're not going to do that today. Alright, so to start with, we're going to set up our guide. So first things first, always have your fingers at least 2 inches from the blade. Now 2 inches would take us out to about here from the blade. However, what I'm mostly going to be looking for is that you make sure that your fingers are never inside that circle. Anybody that has cut their finger on the blade, it's usually because they've had their finger inside of that circle. Another tip is never stand to the right of the bandsaw when in use. So if you're standing to the right and then that blade snaps, it can snap out and hit you. Not so likely when it's really low set like this with the guard. However, just let me see if I can set this down. However, you can also be cutting thicker material, and when you're cutting thicker material like that, that blade is quite exposed. So if you're standing to the right, it may hit you. Okay. And if you're wondering what this little thing right here is called, what this is for, this is called a V-block. And a V-block is just a handy little instrument that we use for cutting dowel or round stock. So right there's a piece of 3/8 maple dowel, and we also have different size diameters of dowel. Anything round with a rounded bottom, you don't want to cut without one of these. And so you would of course set your guide, and then you would cut that off, and this is going to keep it from rolling and kicking back at you. And I have seen a bandsaw kick back fairly hard, and not something fun. Alright, now next up, what we're going to do is we're going to set our guide height. So this is our blade guide, and our blade guide will guide our blade, and it keeps it from twisting too much, keeps it from moving around a whole bunch, but it also will protect us too by having it set to a lower height. And what we do is we set this so that it's 1/4 inch above our piece of wood that we're cutting. Well, lucky for us, a pencil is pretty handy. We should always have a pencil in the shop, and a pencil is 1/4 of an inch. So usually what I do is I hold on to this with one hand, and then I loosen this with the other hand, because this one is fairly loose and it'll just drop down, and then we'll break our safety guard. So I'm just going to try to get this propped up so that we can show you this a little bit better. Loosen that down, set down, tighten that knob back up, and then pull our piece of wood out. So now it's going to be hard for us to get our hands in there. One other thing that we need to keep in mind is that when using the machine, you never want to have your hands perfectly lined up with the blade, because if somebody were to bump your arm, you slip, fall, your hand could go into that blade even still. So have your hands always off to the side, and you're allowed to use just one hand if you have good control over your piece of wood. 2 hands is fine too, you can have them either side, but never have your hand lined up with that blade. So now, to start with, we're going to start by trying to cut out this shape, and this, I purposely chose this shape because it's a little bit too sharp for us to be able to make that all in one continuous pass with this blade. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to cut off the excess, because this is our scrap side. We don't care about this side, right? So we're going to cut that off first. Then what we're going to do is we're going to make some relief cuts. And relief cuts are just short little cuts that will go up to that line, and we're going to back out of them. When you are backing out of a cut, make sure you don't force or jerk it back out, because you may pull that blade off of the wheels. Okay, Once we have that cut, then we can come along here and that whole piece is going to fall off. And that's just the whole goal, is just to make it easier for us to remove that material. So maybe next I'd go along that edge and then maybe make a few relief cuts in here or go across there. The shorter the relief cuts, the faster it's going to be. So I'm going to try to show you that right now. Remember, we should have our dust collector on. Always have your safety glasses, your PPE on. We've set our guide. We're going to turn our machine on. Always stand by the machine until it comes to a complete stop, because even though the machine's turned off, it's going to take a while for it to come to a complete stop. And somebody could walk by, not hear that machine going, and put their hand into it. Once the machine is off, then we can push our scrap pieces out of the way, and we'll clean those up at the end of class, or if they start to get in the way. So that's what that would look like. You notice that I tried not to get past my line, and that way, if I leave my line, I can sand away. No matter what, you're probably going to have some blade marks, and that can be taken care of with sanding as long as we haven't gone past our line. One other method that we can talk about for cutting sharp curves is called back cutting, and I'm not going to do too much of it, but it's a little bit more advanced. If you want to cut a sharp curve and not do a bunch of relief cuts, you cut in and then you back up in that kerf. So the kerf is the area that the blade is removed. You're going to back up in that space and then go forward, and you just keep doing that until eventually you make a curve. So I'll try that right now. That's what's called back cutting. And how do you know if you're forcing the machine to curve too much? You'll hear the blade sort of whining, or you might see some sparks coming out of this area. And if you're pushing too much, then just back off. Likewise, if you do start to get past your line, just stop what you're doing, back up, and then go forward again and realign. And that's it. Be safe out there.